6 weeks before my wedding, my sister said something I'll never forget. "You can have a wedding anytime, Addie. This is my first baby." Then she scheduled her baby shower on the exact same day as my wedding. Same hour, same afternoon. And one by one, my entire family chose her party instead. My mother, my father, even the man who promised to walk me down the aisle. 7 people showed up to my wedding. But weeks later, 417 messages appeared when they discovered where I spent my honeymoon. My sister said it 6 weeks before my wedding while stirring lemon slices into sparkling water, like she was hosting a daytime talk show instead of detonating my life. "You can have a wedding anytime, Addie. This is my first baby." She said it in my mother's kitchen under those ridiculous pendant lights my parents installed when Brett paid for the renovation. The ones my mother still introduced to guests like they'd gone to medical school. I remember the exact way Colette looked when she said it too. Cream knit dress, one hand on her stomach, chin slightly lifted, the soft, confident smile of a woman who has spent years watching everyone reorganize reality around her moods. She did not say it apologetically. She did not say it with tears or regret, or even that fake little wince people use when they know they're being selfish but still want credit for acknowledging it. No. She said it like she was announcing weather. Like my wedding day was just some flexible little hobby I'd chosen for myself, the kind of thing a reasonable person could move if a more important event appeared. And then she booked her baby's shower on the exact same day. Same Saturday. Same hour. Same afternoon. Same family. Same trap. My name is Adeline Farrow. I'm 28 years old. And if you've ever had a family member make your biggest day feel like a scheduling inconvenience, then you already know the kind of silence that follows a sentence like that. It is not loud at first. It doesn't hit you like a scream. It hits like subtraction. Like the room has quietly decided there isn't enough space for your joy and hers, and everybody already knows which one they plan to keep. I stood there in my mother's kitchen with a ceramic mug in my hand, still warm from coffee, and watched the steam fade between us, while my brain tried to catch up to what she had actually said. My wedding was already booked. Deposits paid. Invitations printed. Dress altered. Flowers ordered. Marcus had spent 2 weekends building our arch by hand from salvaged oak. My father had already promised to walk me down the aisle. Not casually. Not in passing. He had said, "I'll be there, sweetheart. I promise." My father did not throw around the word promise lightly. In our house, promises were supposed to be the sturdy things. And yet here was my sister talking about my wedding the way people talk about moving a dental cleaning. "Colette," I said finally, because I needed to hear her explain it in full. Sometimes when you love someone, even after they've spent years making that love expensive, you still give them one more chance to sound human. My wedding is that day. She blinked at me once, slow and almost bored, then reached for one of the sugar cookies my mother had left on the marble island. "I know," she said, "but Brett already booked the room at the club, and the only opening they had was June 14th. It's not like I picked it just to upset you." That last sentence is always interesting to me, isn't it? Because guilty people love denying intentions nobody has explicitly accused them of yet. I hadn't said, "You did this on purpose." Not then. But she had already built the denial into her answer, which told me 2 things instantly. First, she knew exactly how this looked. Second, she expected to get away with it anyway. My mother, who had been rinsing berries at the sink with the concentrated expression of a woman pretending not to hear something she fully intended to benefit from later, finally turned around. "Girls," she said, dragging the word out like she was moderating peace talks in the Balkans, "let's not make this dramatic." There it was. The Farrow family's favorite disinfectant. Dramatic. In our house, dramatic was not a description. It was a weapon. It meant stop having a proportionate response to something unfair because your discomfort is making other people feel observed. If I said I was hurt, I was dramatic. If I said a promise had been broken, I was dramatic. If I cried, I was dramatic. Meanwhile, Colette could hijack my wedding date with the confidence of a woman reserving a brunch table and somehow remain delicate. That was the family equation. Her needs were facts. Mine were atmosphere. I'm not being dramatic, I said, though I could already hear from my own voice that I was slipping into the old trap, the one where I tried to sound so reasonable no one could accuse me of feeling too much. I'm saying my wedding is already that day. People can't be in Greenwich at noon and Mystic at 3. They literally can't. Colette gave a tiny shrug and bit into the cookie. People will do what they want. It was such a clean little sentence. So effortless. So poisonous. Because what she was really saying was people will choose, and I already know how that goes. Brett Whitfield, my brother-in-law, wasn't there that afternoon, but you need to understand him to understand the machinery behind all of this. Brett owned, or more accurately inherited and polished, a commercial real estate company in Fairfield County. He was one of those men who wore cashmere quarter zips like they were moral character. Expensive watch, perfect veneers, voice trained to sound relaxed even when talking about money in the kind of numbers that make other people sit straighter. Brett had married Colette 5 years earlier and, in the process, become less a husband than a full economic climate. He paid my parents' mortgage. He funded the kitchen renovation. He gave my mother a supplementary credit card that she pretended to mention casually and used like a love language. Once Brett entered the family system, loyalty stopped being emotional and became logistical. People did not just love Colette. They depended on her orbit. And when dependency enters a family, honesty usually packs a bag and leaves through the side door. My father, Richard Farrow, was a branch manager at a regional bank for 31 years. Respectable, predictable, the kind of man who ironed shirts on Saturday mornings with the same stern concentration other men reserve for open-heart surgery. He liked rules when they protected his dignity and flexibility when they protected his comfort. My mother, Diane, stayed home, hosted book clubs, maintained the illusion of effortless order, and spent most of my life acting as though the greatest threat to family peace was not cruelty, but anyone naming it out loud. From the outside, we looked solid. White colonial house in Glastonbury. Hydrangeas along the front path. Black shutters. Holiday cards with coordinated sweaters and restrained smiles. But inside the house, one rule sat underneath everything whether anyone spoke it or not. Colette first. Always. Colette's feelings. Colette's crises. Colette's image. If Colette was happy, then the family was functioning. If she was upset, then the weather changed for everybody. I learned that young. Some families raised daughters. Mine raised satellites. We orbited the brightest need in the room, and somehow that was always her. I should probably tell you about Marcus too, because you can't understand what my family was rejecting unless you understand who I was marrying. Marcus Delaney is a painter. Not hobby painter. Not, he does cute little commissions on Etsy painter. Real painter. Oil. Canvas. Smell of turpentine in the air. One line moved 6 times because truth matters painter. I met him at an art fair in New Haven 3 years before the wedding. He was standing in front of a cityscape he'd painted, frowning at it like it had personally wasted his time, and I laughed before I meant to, because the look on his face was so deeply offended by his own nearly finished masterpiece that I thought, yes, there you are. He turned. I saw his eyes. Gray, steady, the kind of eyes that never ask for permission to see through nonsense. We ended up talking for 40 minutes beside that canvas while people drifted around us holding plastic wine cups and pretending to understand composition. Marcus was not flashy. He did not fill rooms. He anchored them. He listened with his whole face. He noticed when people were lying to themselves. He painted portraits and urban interiors and the kinds of lonely, quiet spaces most people walk past without realizing they've just exposed themselves in front of them. Some months money came in easily. Some months we lived on pasta and black coffee, and the confidence that talent is not less real because institutions take their time catching up to it. My family hated him almost immediately, which should have been my first clue he was good for me. They didn't hate him because he was rude. Marcus is one of the gentlest men I know. They hated him because he made visible everything their value system couldn't account for. He was gifted without corporate approval. Serious without being rich yet. Grounded without needing to dominate. He painted for a living, which to my family translated loosely as he does not own the right kind of shoes. At Thanksgiving, 8 months before the wedding, my father leaned across the table over gravy and asked him, "So, when are you getting a real job?" That's the sort of sentence men like my father toss off with a chuckle, as if humiliation becomes mentoring if you smile while delivering it. Brett laughed. Colette smirked into her wine. My mother stared very hard at the cranberry sauce. Marcus didn't flinch. He just reached under the table and squeezed my hand once, like a person reminding you that dignity can be private if it needs to be. "I already have one," he said. "It just doesn't come with a tie." I could have kissed him on the spot. Instead, I kicked him lightly under the table because in the Pharaoh house, survival often looked like humor with your teeth still in. 6 months before the wedding, I sent out the invitations. I had painted every floral border myself in watercolor because that's the kind of insane detail work people do when they still believe handmade effort can earn family tenderness. Cream cardstock, wildflowers in washed-out blues and soft greens. Marcus hand-tied each suite with linen ribbon in our studio while music played from an old speaker and the windows fogged from the kettle. It was beautiful. Honest. Ours. The ceremony would be in a garden near Mystic. Small. Intimate. 42 chairs. White peonies. Lavender tied to each aisle seat. A reception under string lights with pizza from a local place because I would rather feed people great pizza under the sky than dry chicken in a ballroom no one remembers. I loved every detail. I loved it in the irrational, vulnerable way only brides who built the thing themselves can understand. Not because it was expensive, because it reflected us. That was the first thing my family could never forgive. A life that wasn't trying to impress them. Around 3 weeks before the wedding, my Aunt Patricia called by accident with the truth. Aunt Patricia was my mother's older sister and the undisputed patron saint of information leakage. She could not hold a secret if you stapled it to her. "Honey," she said, too brightly, "are you going to Colette's shower too, or just your wedding?" I remember exactly where I was standing. In the studio by the sink, washing turquoise out of a brush jar. Paint water cold against my knuckles. "What shower?" I asked. And just like that, the whole structure cracked. Colette's baby shower. June 14th noon. Greenwich Country Club. Gold-rimmed invitations already sent. French caterer from Stamford. Brett's mother handling florals. I didn't hear the next 30 seconds clearly because once your body understands betrayal, sound gets weird. It turns tinny. Far away. Like your ears are trying to spare you the full sentence. When I hung up, I called Colette immediately. 3 rings. Then that bright, polished voice she used when she wanted to sound innocent enough to survive a jury. "Addie, what's up?" Addie. She only used the nickname when she needed to soften a blow or request a favor. "You scheduled your baby's shower on my wedding day." Not a question. "I didn't schedule it," she said too quickly. "The club only had that date, and Brett already put money down." Then she added, "The same way people toss a match into a room they've already soaked in gasoline. And I mean yours is in the afternoon, right? Maybe people can do both." People can do both. Greenwich to Mystic is about 90 minutes on a good day if traffic is feeling charitable and nobody makes a wrong turn behind a landscaping truck. On a June Saturday with a shower at noon and a ceremony at 3? Impossible. She knew that. I knew that. The laws of distance knew that. "You knew my date," I said. "You've known it for months." Pause. Then the sigh. Then the line. "Addie, this is my first baby. You can have a wedding anytime." That is what she said. That is what she genuinely believed. And here's the worst part. She wasn't entirely wrong in one horrifying sense. In my family, a wedding was a preference. Her pregnancy was leverage. My mother took her side immediately, of course. "Honey, maybe you could postpone a few weeks," she said when I called her next. Like moving a wedding is the same as rescheduling a salon appointment. "The deposits are paid," I told her. "The invitations are out." "Well," she said, and I can still hear the shape of her voice when she said it. The careful little tiptoe she used when stepping onto moral ice she fully intended to crack beneath me. Maybe not everybody needs to be at both. Not everybody. Meaning me. Meaning my wedding. Meaning the daughter, who could apparently be celebrated by subset. I called my father then because some stupid sacred part of me still believed he would be different. He let it ring the first time. The second time he answered and sounded tired before I'd even spoken, which is another parental trick I want people to notice. They make themselves sound burdened before the conversation begins, so you start editing your pain to spare them from your pain. "Dad," I said, "are you still walking me down the aisle?" He exhaled, and in that one breath I heard the whole cowardly architecture of my family. The dependence on Brett. The unwillingness to challenge Colette. The dread of choosing me if choosing me meant losing comfort elsewhere. "Of course, sweetheart," he said. But he said it the way men say things they are already preparing to break. Hollow. Draft-like. Like a signature penciled in lightly enough to erase later. I hung up knowing, for the first time in my life, that promises in my family were apparently subject to sponsorship. Let me pause here for a second and ask you something, because I know some of you watching have lived this exact kind of family math and felt crazy for noticing it. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and state in the comments, because I always want to know where these stories land. And tell me honestly, what's the first moment you realized your family loved convenience more than fairness? For me, it was not the shower itself. It was what came after. The RSVPs. Out of 38 family invitations, 22 polite little declines rolled in over the next week. "So sorry, can't make it. We'll be tied up that afternoon." Another family commitment. One by one. Neatly. Like they had all attended the same masterclass in evasive cowardice. No one said, "We're choosing Colette." That would have required a spine. Instead, they used scheduling language, the favorite dialect of people doing something shameful who still want to feel organized. I did not beg. I need that on the record. I did not call and cry and ask how they could do this. I asked once. Clearly. Then I watched their answer arrive in the form of logistics. And logistics, when arranged correctly, can tell the truth more brutally than words ever will. Rachel, my best friend, was the one who showed me how deliberate it all was. Rachel is an ER nurse from Chicago with the bedside manner of a woman who has seen too much blood to respect nonsense. Years ago, my mother added her to the family group chat during one of those temporary periods when being seen as inclusive mattered more than control. Nobody ever removed her, because nobody in my family remembers support staff until the support becomes inconvenient. Rachel called me one evening and said, "Sit down. I have screenshots." That sentence alone should be engraved above certain family front doors. She had them all. Colette individually calling relatives. Guilt-tripping my mother about her first grandchild. Reminding Aunt Patricia that Brett's side would notice if our side looked thin. Telling my father, in one message that made my stomach turn when I read it, "Addie will understand. She's used to being disappointed." Used to being disappointed. Imagine knowing your sister that well, and using the knowledge like a set of lockpicks. That was when I stopped thinking this was selfishness and started seeing it for what it was. Strategy. They weren't just choosing her. They were counting on my resilience to make their choice feel less ugly. They assumed I would absorb it, because I always had. And maybe I would have, if not for one final detail Rachel sent me that night, a line from Colette that sat on my chest like a brick. Honestly, Addie's wedding is so small it's barely an event. She's marrying a painter in a garden. It's not like there's a reception at the Ritz. I read that message twice. Then I closed my phone. Then I opened it again just to prove to myself she had really written it. Marrying a painter in a garden. As if intimacy were embarrassment. As if beauty had to be validated by ballroom square footage. As if my life only counted when expensive enough people noticed. I looked around our studio then. The paint-stained counters. Marcus's unfinished canvases leaning against the wall. Light falling blue through the north windows. The invitation drafts stacked on the work table. Everything real. Everything earned. And I realized something cold and clean. My family didn't just underestimate me. They fundamentally misunderstood value. And when people misunderstand value that badly, they usually don't notice what they've lost until it's hanging in a room they can't afford to enter. I didn't know yet how true that would become. I only knew that my wedding was 12 days away, my family was vanishing one RSVP at a time, and somewhere inside, all that hurt, something had begun to change shape. Not break. Sharpen. Because once you stop begging to be chosen, you start seeing who has actually been standing there all along. And the next person to show me that would not be my father, my mother, or even my sister. It would be someone nobody in my family had ever thought important enough to fear. The last 12 days before my wedding felt like living inside a house after someone has quietly removed one of the supporting beams. Nothing collapses right away. That is what makes it so unnerving. The walls still stand. The dishes still clink. People still ask whether you've chosen napkins. But somewhere under the surface, the structure has already changed, and every ordinary sound starts carrying a second meaning. I would wake up in the studio apartment Marcus and I rented in New Haven, hear the radiator hiss awake, smell coffee from the little stovetop pot he insisted made everything taste less sad than a machine, and for 3 or 4 seconds I'd forget. Then my eyes would land on the invitation proofs spread across our work table or the garment bag hanging on the closet door, and the whole thing would flood back in. Colette. The shower. The same day. The same hour. My father's hollow promise. 22 family notes arranged in polite little rows like gravestones. And all of it wrapped in the family's favorite perfume. Let's not be dramatic. That phrase started following me around like secondhand smoke. My mother had said it in the kitchen. My Aunt Patricia said it when she called just to check in, which in her case meant gather information and leak it selectively later. Even Natalie used a version of it in a text that read, "Addie, I know this feels big right now, but maybe if you zoom out, zoom out." That one nearly made me choke on my cereal. People who have never once taken your pain seriously become philosophers the minute your pain threatens their comfort. I was standing at the sink when I read it, holding a spoon over a bowl of rapidly softening bran flakes, and I laughed so hard Marcus came out of the bathroom with shaving cream still on one cheek and thought I had finally snapped. "What?" he asked. I handed him the phone. He read the message, looked at me, looked back at the phone, and said, "I would like to personally fight the phrase zoom out." I love him for things like that. For understanding that sometimes what you need most is not wisdom, but the correct level of disrespect toward nonsense. Still, humor only gets you so far when the wound keeps proving itself in practical ways. Every day brought a new little confirmation that my wedding had become optional to the people who were supposed to be incapable of imagining it without them. My mother never called to ask about my dress. She never asked to see photos of the flowers or the table layout or the hand-painted vow cards I'd spent an entire Tuesday night making because I wanted every detail to feel human and handmade and ours. The absence of her interest became its own kind of language. In most families, silence before a wedding can mean people are busy, distracted, overextended. In mine, silence usually meant they had already chosen a side and were trying to avoid having to hear themselves say it. The only family member who still behaved as though my wedding was a real event was my grandmother, who lived in a condo in West Hartford and had spent the last 10 years pretending not to notice what the rest of us all noticed constantly. She called me 3 days after the shower reveal and asked, in that careful old-school voice people have when they think if they use enough manners they might survive the truth, "Have you chosen your shoes yet, darling?" I nearly cried right there at the kitchen counter because the question itself was such a rare act of loyalty. Not, "Can you move the date?" Not, "How upset are you?" Not, "What will your sister think?" Shoes. Meaning, I acknowledge the wedding exists. I acknowledge you are the bride. I acknowledge there is a body in this family whose life is happening and not merely adjusting around someone else's. I found a pair, I told her. Ivory. Vintage. They pinch a little, which I'm taking as a sign of elegance. She laughed softly. Good. Weddings should hurt a tiny bit or people won't respect them. That was the kind of thing she said and I loved her for it. She also told me, almost casually, that she had received 2 separate reminder calls from Colette in the last week. 2. She's very anxious about attendance, Grandma said. She made a point of telling me which cousins from Fairfield would be there and what the dessert table was costing. My grandmother's tone remained neutral, But that was the point. In our family, neutrality from an older woman is often a sign of deep disapproval. They were raised in an era where open conflict made your lipstick melt, so instead they sharpened understatement until it could kill at 20 paces. "Are you going to her shower?" I asked. She paused just long enough to make me hate the answer before she spoke it. "Your grandfather says the drive to Mystic is easier on his back than Greenwich." I closed my eyes. That was yes, and better than yes. That was my grandparents choosing me in the only language my family would hear clearly: logistics. When I hung up, I sat at the table for a long minute staring at the watercolor place cards I had been lettering for the reception, one for each guest, names painted in my careful brush script with tiny wildflower motifs in the corners. My family's names were still there: Mom, Dad, Colette, Natalie, Aunt Patricia, Uncle Tom, all of them. It struck me then how intimate hope is. People talk about hope like it's noble and buoyant, but in these situations, hope is humiliating. Hope means you keep painting names onto paper for people who are already quietly planning to leave those seats empty. I picked up the card with my father's name and stared at it until the letters blurred. Marcus came over, took the brush from my hand without a word, and set it gently aside. "Enough for tonight," he said. "If I stop, it becomes real," I told him. "It's already real," he said. "Stopping won't change that. It'll just stop you from bleeding on stationery." Again, exactly the correct amount of tenderness and insult. We ate takeout Thai food on the floor because the table was covered in wedding work, and halfway through his noodles, Marcus asked the question no one in my family had asked because no one in my family really wanted the answer. "If they don't come," he said carefully, "what do you want the day to feel like anyway?" It was such a simple question, but it opened something in me, because all week I had been thinking only in terms of loss. Empty chairs, missing people, betrayal dressed in RSVP language. I hadn't let myself imagine the day without them, because that felt too much like surrender. But Marcus wasn't asking me to surrender. He was asking me to define, to decide what was still ours even if the worst people in my bloodline continued behaving like they had a group discount on decency. I looked around the room, the half-finished canvases leaning against the walls, our old futon, the invitation samples, the lavender ribbon, the stack of envelopes waiting to be sealed with wax. "I wanted to feel true," I said finally. "Not impressive, not brave, just true." He nodded like that was the answer he'd been waiting for. "Then we can still have it," he said, "even if we have to build the whole feeling ourselves." That sentence carried me through the next few days more than I realized at the time. Because the next few days were ugly. Not dramatic in the cinematic sense. No one burst into rooms to declare allegiance. No one sent me an eloquent betrayal text I could frame and show later as proof. Real family cruelty is usually lazier than that. It arrives by omission. By delayed replies. By seen and no response. By little reroutes of energy. My father stopped answering calls completely unless I tried during his lunch break, and even then the conversation sounded as though he was speaking from inside a moving vehicle, emotionally and literally. My mother sent me a message asking if I had thought more about possibly making the day smaller if attendance looked light, which is one of those sentences that seems almost considerate until you realize she was gently encouraging me to pre-humiliate myself so Colette's event would not look like the cause. Natalie texted me links to intimate elopement ideas like I was some woman who had forgotten she'd already booked a venue and 42 chairs and a life. And Aunt Patricia, bless her treacherous little soul, kept leaking me information she absolutely did not intend to leak if one judged by her tone. "Well, Brett's mother is coming in from Greenwich," she said one evening, "and apparently there's a floral wall for photos, so you know how your sister gets when something looks expensive." That phrase stuck with me. When something looks expensive. That was the axis of my family. Not goodness. Not loyalty. Aesthetics plus money. If an event carried enough perceived status, it became morally magnetic. That is how my wedding lost before anyone had even chosen a dress. We weren't at the Ritz. We were in a garden by the salt marsh in Mystic with wildflowers and salvaged wood and pizza under lights. To me, that sounded romantic. To my family, it sounded skippable. Which tells you all you need to know about why some people can never be impressed by honesty. It doesn't photograph as well as hierarchy. Around the halfway mark of all this, Rachel flew in from Chicago. She arrived on a Wednesday night dragging a suitcase, a duffel bag, and the kind of energy only emergency room nurses and women raised with brothers can summon after a bad travel day. She walked into the studio, took one look at my face, and said, "Okay. First of all, if anyone says the phrase bigger picture again, I'm king a car." Then she hugged me hard enough to reset my spine. You do not truly appreciate loyal friends until your family starts behaving like a committee of sponsored weasels. Rachel didn't ask me whether I still thought maybe my parents would come. She didn't float possibilities. She didn't offer silver linings. She unpacked, opened a bottle of cheap red wine, and spread out the group chat screenshots on the floor like evidence in a murder trial. "We need to read this correctly," she said. "Not emotionally. Strategically. That is why I love her. She understands that some wounds get cleaner when translated into systems." We went through each message again. Colette's individual calls. Her guilting my mother about the first grandchild. Her reminding Aunt Patricia that Brett's side would notice if our side looked thin. Her message to my father. "Dad, Addie will understand. She always does." That one had a date stamp and a time. 9:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. Casual. Unapologetic. The confidence of a woman who had spent years being right, not because she was right, but because everyone else found it cheaper. "She knows exactly how far she can push because she's never been made to stop," Rachel said. Then she handed me another screenshot I had somehow missed the first time. Brett in the family chat, one short line. "Let's not create tension over a scheduling overlap. We all know which event has more moving parts." More moving parts. I actually put the phone down after reading that because the contempt was so polished. More moving parts. Translation. Our event is more expensive, more status heavy, more socially useful. Therefore your vows can absorb the hit. He thinks in return on investment terms, Rachel muttered. Your family thinks in emotional kickbacks. It was the kind of sentence I wish I'd said, which is one reason I keep her around. We kept reading. My mother asking if anyone had confirmed attendance with our side. Natalie suggesting maybe my wedding could become an intimate artist thing instead, which is apparently what upper middle class women say when they want to make your pain sound artisanal. And then the final screenshot that ended all ambiguity. Colette writing, "Honestly, Addie's wedding is so small it barely counts. She's marrying a painter in a garden. It's not like there's a reception at the Ritz." I had seen the message before, but something about reading it with Rachel there changed it. Maybe because she looked at me after and said, very calmly, "Okay, so now we know it's not confusion. It's class contempt with family access." That line hit like cold water. Class contempt with family access. Yes, exactly. My family hadn't merely chosen the baby shower over my wedding. They had chosen the event that better reflected the status story they wanted to keep telling about themselves. Colette's shower, backed by Brett's money, held at Greenwich Country Club with catered French pastries and a floral wall, made them feel like a family on the rise. My wedding, handmade and intimate and married to an artist, threatened to reveal what they actually were, dependent, insecure, and weirdly easy to rent. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it. That night, after Rachel went to bed on the futon and Marcus fell asleep in the chair with one of his sketchbooks on his chest, I stayed up at the kitchen table and wrote one final group message to the family. Not pleading, not accusing, just clear. Date, time, address. Ceremony begins at 3. If you are coming, I would love to see you there. If not, I understand that too. I read it 3 times before sending because clarity, in families like mine, must be sanded smooth or they'll slice themselves on a comma and call you hostile. I pressed send at 10:47 p.m. and watched the little delivered checkmarks appear one by one. No one answered. Not one person. The silence after that message was the most honest thing my family had ever given me. By morning, the day before the wedding, my stomach felt like a fist. Every task took twice as long because my body kept trying to negotiate with what my mind already knew. I went to the florist and picked up the peonies. I drove to the venue and watched the rental company set up all 42 white chairs in rows beside the arch Marcus had finished that afternoon. It stood there in the late sun, eucalyptus threaded through the salvaged wood, white ribbon lifting in the breeze. It was beautiful enough to make me angry because beauty feels almost offensive when the people who should be there are busy choosing elsewhere. I walked the aisle path alone once while the coordinator adjusted table linens, just to see how it felt. Gravel under my shoes. Salt in the air from the marsh. String lights waiting to matter later. 42 chairs. 42 chances for somebody to show up. The coordinator, a gentle retired judge named Marlene who officiated small ceremonies when she got bored of not being in charge, came over and asked whether we should tighten the seating layout if attendance was likely to be lower. I looked at the rows, all that space holding breath, and said no. Leave them, I told her. If they're empty, let them be empty honestly. Marlene studied my face for 1 second and nodded. Good answer, she said. Bad things grow mold when you decorate around them. I loved her immediately. That night, Marcus and I lay awake in our studio apartment with the windows open and summer insects sawing away outside in the dark. The dress hung from the closet door. My shoes sat ready. Rachel's emergency makeup kit had taken over half the bathroom counter, like it planned to perform Tria. Marcus reached for my hand in the dark. You know I'll marry you if it's just us and a sandwich board in a parking lot, he said. I know, I whispered. That's not what hurts. He squeezed once. I know. And because he knew, he didn't try to fix the wrong thing. He didn't tell me my family would come around. He didn't insist tomorrow would magically erase the knowledge that the people who raised me had chosen finger sandwiches and social positioning over my vows. He just stayed awake beside me while I stared at the ceiling and listened to the crickets and the far-off traffic and the shape of my own life shifting underneath me. By dawn, I had stopped waiting for a miracle. That sounds sad, but it wasn't. It was clarifying. Waiting had been costing me more than their absence. It had been costing me the day itself. So I stood up, stepped into the light, and got ready to marry Marcus with or without the people who had mistaken my love for something infinitely postponable. What I did not know then, not fully, was that the person who would step into the space my father left empty was already awake, already dressing, and already carrying a secret big enough to change the story of that day from heartbreak into something my family would spend months trying and failing to rewrite. The morning of my wedding began with a kind of bright June light that makes people believe in signs. Sun coming in soft and gold through the studio windows. The air already warm by 7, carrying that green, damp sweetness Connecticut gets in June when the grass is overconfident and everything smells like it has somewhere romantic to be. For one stupid half second, before my phone lit up, I let myself think maybe this was how the day would turn. Maybe my father would remember himself. Maybe my mother would look at my dress and feel some ancient buried animal instinct to protect her daughter. Maybe Colette, swollen with attention and entitlement, would have one tiny attack of conscience and decide she did not actually need to host a pink balloon coronation on the exact afternoon I was promising my life to someone. Then the phone buzzed on the kitchen table, and because bodies are traitors, my heart knew it was him before my hand even touched the screen. Dad. I stood there in a silk slip with one earring in, one bare foot cold on the old wood floor, and answered on the first ring. Hi, sweetheart, he said, already sounding like a man asking for forgiveness, without planning to deserve it. There are tones you learn in childhood the way other people learn state capitals. My father's disappointment tone. My father's lecture tone. My father's don't make this more difficult tone. And then there was this one. Cowardice softened by politeness. Dad, I said because if I use too many words too early I might break the wrong way. I don't know how to say this, he began, which is one of those phrases that always means the speaker has in fact chosen exactly how to say it and just wants credit for suffering through the delivery. Your mother and I, with Colette's shower starting at noon and the drive to Greenwich and then traffic and everything, I don't think we can make it to Mystic by 3. 8 seconds. I know because I counted them. 8 seconds of silence after he said it. And in those 8 seconds, my whole childhood rearranged itself into something uglier and simpler. Every recital where he checked his watch. Every graduation conversation that somehow turned back to Colette's needs. Every promise handed to me like a polished coin and later quietly taken back because honoring it turned out to be inconvenient. It all collapsed down into one little sentence. I don't think we can make it. Not we're choosing not to. Not your sister pressured us. Not I'm ashamed of myself. Just traffic and everything. The great American burial ground for accountability. You promised, I said. My voice didn't shake, and I am proud of that in a way only people from disappointing families will understand. I know, he said, too quickly because agreement is cheap when action has already left town. I know, Addie, but this is Colette's first baby. We're all trying to keep things smooth. Keep things smooth. That was really the family religion. Not kindness. Not fairness. Surface tension. The appearance of calm no matter whose throat it required under the water. This is my only wedding day, I said. There won't be another one. He let out the kind of breath people use when they think you are being emotional for correctly naming reality. Don't make this harder than it has to be. That was the moment. Not the shower announcement. Not the RSVP list. Not Aunt Patricia's little leaks. That sentence. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Meaning, accept the wound quietly so the person inflicting it doesn't have to feel clumsy. I hung up without saying goodbye. I set the phone face down on the table and just stood there. Rachel was in the bathroom doorway with a mascara wand in one hand and a face like she was trying not to commit a felony before breakfast. Was that him? She asked. I nodded. He's not coming. She closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them with the calm of an ER nurse who has seen blood do stranger things than break a heart. Okay, she said. Then we keep moving. That's the thing about women who know how to survive emergencies. They don't waste your oxygen on fake outrage when what you need is function. Rachel sat me down on a stool by the window and did my makeup with a sort of gentle aggression usually reserved for war paint and brides. Look up, she said. Blink. No, not like that. Like a woman who's about to be legally adored. I laughed despite myself, and thank God I did, because I needed the reset. Around us the studio looked like the backstage area of a tiny handmade miracle. My dress hanging from the closet door, vintage ivory lace, tea-length, altered by a seamstress in Mystic who charged me $80 and told me, with the solemnity of a priest, that no woman should marry in polyester, if she can help it. The bouquet on the table in a mason jar, peonies and lavender from a local farm stand, simple and fragrant and stubbornly alive. Marcus's tie laid across a chair. My shoes lined up beside the couch. Everything ready. Everything real. Everything proceeding without the people who had raised me, which felt both devastating and weirdly clarifying. There is a certain kind of loss that, once it arrives fully, leaves behind room. Not joy, exactly, but room. Room to stop bargaining with what people should have been. Room to see what remains when obligation burns off. By the time we left for Mystic, I had stopped looking at my phone. If my mother, my sister, or anyone else had decided to discover a conscience between the club and the gift table, they were going to have to do it without an audience. The drive took just under an hour and a half. Rachel drove because she said if I tried, I'd either speed, cry, or end up in Rhode Island by accident, and she was correct on all counts. The roads curled greener and quieter the farther east we went. Marsh grass, weathered signs, white church steeples, stone walls running along the edges of old fields like somebody had once been stubborn enough to line the land by hand, and then just left the argument there. We didn't talk much. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some griefs become indecent if handled too loudly before noon. Rachel just drove and occasionally handed me a tissue or a granola bar like emotional support was a supply chain she intended to keep uninterrupted. When we pulled up to the inn in Mystic, the first thing I saw was the garden. 42 white chairs in clean rows on the lawn, each one with a sprig of lavender tied to the back with cream ribbon, all facing the arch Marcus had built from salvaged oak. The marsh beyond it caught the afternoon light and turned silver green at the edges. It was so beautiful that, for a second, I hated everybody. Not because beauty was wrong, because it deserved witnesses better than the ones I had been given. Marlene, our officiant, came over in a navy linen dress and hugged me like a woman who understood that ceremony is often just grief wearing flowers. "You look perfect," she said. "And before you ask, no, we're not moving a single chair." I must have made some involuntary face because she smiled a little. "Let emptiness testify," she said. "It's good at it." I loved her for that too. Marcus was inside the inn getting ready with Dave and Lena, two of his friends from art school who had shown up in wrinkled jackets and immediate loyalty, which is honestly the best kind of formal wear. I didn't see him right away. That was deliberate. We wanted one real first look at the end of the aisle, not the kind where life had already smudged the emotion before it could land. So I stood in a small side room with Rachel fixing one last curl near my temple while the low sound of strings drifted in from outside. Two music students from the local college, violin and cello, both earnest enough to make Bach feel personal. Every now and then I could hear footsteps on the gravel, chair legs shifting slightly, the soft coordination of a day continuing whether or not my family had bothered to attend it. "How many?" I asked finally, because until you ask, hope remains a kind of illness. Rachel looked at me in the mirror first, then answered honestly. 7. 7. Out of 42 chairs. 7 people had come. Rachel, Dave, Lena, 2 of my college friends who'd driven down from New York, Marlene, and Harold. Harold Brenton, our landlord from New Haven, in a suit I had never seen before and shoes polished enough to suggest he had not chosen them casually. "Harold came?" I asked. "Harold was early," Rachel said. "He brought a wrapped box and corrected the florist on the angle of the eucalyptus." I laughed, and that one hurt because I was close to crying again. Harold. Quiet, corduroy jacket Harold, who let us pay rent late once without drama and brought us tomatoes from his garden in August, had made a 90-minute drive and showed up before my own father. You can spend years learning who your family is, and then one day a landlord in a good suit teaches you more in 10 minutes than blood did in 3 decades. At 2:55, Marlene came to the door and asked if I was ready. Not in the airy bridal way people ask, all champagne tone and nerves. She asked it like a judge asks if you are prepared to proceed, which felt much more appropriate. "Yes," I said, though that word held more moving parts than she could possibly know. Ready to marry Marcus. Ready to be seen by the 7 people who actually chose me. Ready to survive the sight of all those empty chairs. Ready to walk without my father. That last one still sat in my chest like unspent weather. Rachel squeezed my hands once and went ahead to take her place. I was alone at the start of the aisle then. Dress light against my legs in the breeze, bouquet cool in my hands, the first notes of Pachelbel's canon drifting out over the grass like a joke God still found entertaining. From where I stood, I could see the whole arrangement. The 7 occupied chairs scattered among the rows like tiny islands of loyalty. The lavender stirring. The marsh stretching wide and glinting. Marcus at the far end under the arch, tall and still, and trying very hard not to let his face show what mine probably already had. And between us, the aisle, empty of father, full of fact. I took one breath and stepped forward, and that was when I heard footsteps behind me. Not rushed, not hesitant, deliberate, measured. The kind of footsteps made by someone who has already decided to do the thing before asking if they're allowed. "I believe," a voice said behind me, dry as old paper and somehow warm at the same time, "that no bride should have to walk toward joy looking abandoned." I turned. Harold stood there in a navy 3-piece suit, beautifully cut, pale blue pocket square, silver cuff links that caught the sun when he lifted his hand. He looked slightly uncomfortable in the way men do when they're dressed better than usual and aware it matters. But his eyes were steady, not pitying, not overly solemn, just present. "Harold," I said, and my throat nearly gave out on his name alone. He offered his arm. "Your father should be here," he said. "Since he isn't, someone decent ought to be." That sentence broke something open in me. Not the violent kind of break. The kind where sealed room gets air. I looked at his arm, at the sharp line of the suit sleeve, at the weathered hand extending with more honor than anyone related to me had managed that day, and I understood in one clean, devastating flash that family is not always the people who made you. Sometimes it is the people who notice when you're about to have to carry too much alone and quietly take half the weight without making you perform gratitude for it. You don't have to, I whispered, because some old reflex still made me apologize whenever someone did something generous. I know, he said. That's why this counts. I took his arm. The violin swelled. Somewhere in the front row, Rachel started crying openly, because subtlety is not always the highest virtue. We walked. The grass gave softly under our feet. The lavender brushed the chairs as we passed. The 7 people who had come stood one by one, not because protocol told them to, but because love did. And when I looked up and saw Marcus at the end of the aisle, his eyes already wet, one hand over his mouth like he was trying to keep his whole heart from showing at once, I felt the day shift. Not magically. Not into some fairy tale correction where the hurt vanished. Into truth. Real truth. My father had failed me. My family had chosen spectacle and hierarchy and convenience. But still, here I was, being walked toward the man I loved by someone who had shown up. The ceremony itself lasted maybe 12 minutes. Marlene kept it short and wise and just irreverent enough to feel like us. Marcus had written his vows on the back of a primed canvas card because apparently he enjoys making me cry with textured surfaces. I'd written mine on the back of one of my own illustrations, a woman planting flowers in a field nobody thought would grow anything. When we read them, we both cried, then laughed through the tears because otherwise we would have dissolved into puddles and someone still needed to sign paperwork. The marsh wind lifted the edges of my veil. A dragonfly landed briefly on the back row of an empty chair. Somewhere in the distance a boat horn sounded, weirdly perfect, like the world itself had decided to witness in whatever language it had available. And when Marlene said, "You may kiss your husband," the 7 people who had come clapped hard enough to sound like 20. That matters too. Noise is not only about quantity. Sometimes 7 people can make more sound than a room full of relatives who never once intended to mean it. Afterward, we took photographs in the garden. And yes, the empty chairs stayed in some of them because I refused to pretend absence hadn't happened. Harold stood with us for one shot, still buttoned into that elegant suit, one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair my father had abandoned. Marcus thanked him quietly, and Harold just grunted, embarrassed by gratitude in the way men of his generation often are. "You two built a beautiful day," he said. "Don't let idiots edit it." That line stayed with me. The reception was exactly what we planned. Pizza from downtown Mystic. Wine Rachel brought in a crate from Chicago because she is apparently 1 part trauma surgeon, 1 part bootleg sommelier. Cake from a local bakery with too much buttercream and no interest in minimalism. Dave paired his phone to a speaker and suddenly we were dancing on grass while the light slid lower and lower and fireflies began appearing at the edges of the garden like shy punctuation. It was joyful. Truly. Not in spite of everything. Alongside everything. That distinction matters. Pain does not cancel joy. They coexist like difficult neighbors, and sometimes, if you are very lucky, joy plays its music just loud enough to drown out the other house for a while. But grief waits until the songs end. And when the music dipped and Marcus was helping fold tables and Rachel was gathering wine glasses and Harold had gone to retrieve the wrapped box he brought from his car, I sat in one of the empty chairs and looked at my phone. Nothing. Not a single message. No thinking of you. No hope it was beautiful. No panicked guilt text from my father sneaking into the parking lot of the country club. Nothing from my mother. Nothing from Natalie. Nothing from Colette. My wedding day existed fully enough for them to skip it, but apparently not enough to acknowledge afterward. I opened Instagram because pain is curious and self-destructive like that. Colette had posted 14 separate photos from the shower. Pink balloons. Monogrammed cookies. Her hand on her belly. Aunt Patricia holding a mimosa, like she'd won the Olympics in being nearby. My mother laughing too hard at something off camera. My father. This one I enlarged twice because some part of me still wanted to disbelieve it, standing beside Colette with one hand resting on her stomach and the biggest smile I'd seen on his face in months. The caption on the final group photo read, "Surrounded by love. Family is everything." She posted that while I was saying my vows. Surrounded by love. Family is everything. I sat there in my wedding dress among 35 empty chairs and thought, no, family is branding for some people. Love is what the 7 people here did. As I stared at the photos, one detail pulled at my attention in a way I couldn't explain then. In the background of a picture taken near the bar, Brett stood half turned away from the camera with his phone pressed to his ear, jaw tight, expression wrong for a man hosting a celebration that was supposedly important enough to steal an entire family. He looked stressed. Not socially stressed. Financially stressed. Like a man doing arithmetic in a room built to avoid it. I noticed it, filed it away, and because I had no idea yet what engine had already started turning behind the scenes, I let it pass. That was my mistake. Not because the wedding wasn't real. It was. Not because the joy was fake. It wasn't. But because I still didn't understand that while my family was busy choosing the event that looked more expensive, someone else had already started valuing the thing they called small. And the first person to show me that fully would not be my sister, my mother, or any relative suddenly discovering my number later. It would be the quiet man who had walked me down the aisle in my father's place, the one holding a wrapped box in his hands like he'd been waiting for the right moment to stop being merely our landlord and become something my family would never see coming. After the last slice of cake had been wrapped in foil and the final wine glass had been collected from the grass, the garden took on that strange afterglow only weddings and funerals seem to have, the kind where the event is technically over, but the air still holds the shape of what happened there. The sky over the salt marsh had gone from gold to blue-gray, and the first real evening chill had started pushing through the warm June softness. The string lights above the reception tables clicked on one by one, and for a moment the empty chairs looked almost holy, like they had finally stopped waiting for the people who never intended to deserve them. Marcus was across the lawn helping Dave break down the speaker and fold the extra tables, jacket off, tie loosened, sleeves rolled to the forearms, his hair curling slightly at the edges from the damp air. He looked tired and happy and wrecked in the exact proportions I wanted from a groom. Rachel was carrying 3 pizza boxes toward the kitchen like she had personally declared war on food waste. Marlene had gone to retrieve her shawl. And Harold, who had already done more for my dignity in one afternoon than my father had managed in decades, stood near the arch with a rectangular wrapped box tucked under one arm, watching the rest of us the way men like him watch things they've already decided matter. There are people who attend your life and people who quietly assess where they may be useful in it. Harold had never been loud enough to seem important. That was one of the reasons my family would never have seen him clearly. They were too busy assigning value by volume. I walked over to him with my heels in one hand and my bouquet down to 3 surviving peonies because Rachel had started distributing stems to random strangers like some kind of emotional florist vigilante. "You should sit," I told Harold. "You've been in that suit all day." He gave me a dry look. I've been alive long enough to know standing at the right moments matters more than comfort. Then he looked past me toward the half-empty lawn and added, "Though I admit, I didn't expect your family to make loyalty look so physically measurable." I turned and followed his gaze. 35 empty chairs still in rows. 7 occupied earlier. Even now, after vows and cake and music and the fact of marriage itself, seeing them still did something sharp to my chest. Absence is such a rude visual. It doesn't soften with context. It just sits there and keeps being true. "I thought I'd stop seeing them after the ceremony," I said quietly. "You won't," Harold replied. "Not for a while. But one day you'll remember the people who stood, not the chairs that didn't." Then he lifted the box slightly. "This is for the 2 of you. Though technically, if we are being accurate, it's more conversation starter than a gift." That was Harold. Even kindness came wrapped in understatement with him. I called Marcus over, and we opened the box together on one of the reception tables while the marsh wind moved gently through the ribbon ends on the chairs. Inside was a framed black and white photograph, matted beautifully, old enough that the edges of the print had gone slightly soft with time. It showed a gallery opening in New York, probably late 1980s or early 1990s, judging by the hair and the cigarettes and the kind of confidence everyone in the room seemed to be renting by the hour. In the center, younger and impossibly sharper in the jaw, stood Harold in a dark suit beside a man I recognized instantly from books and documentaries. Bernard Granger. If you know contemporary American art, you know that name. Not because he painted for mass appeal. Quite the opposite. He painted rooms people left, and then sold them for enough money to ruin cousins. Marcus looked from the photograph to Harold, then back to the photograph. That's not... Harold took pity on him and finished the sentence.
Yes.
That's me. And yes, that's Bernard Granger. And yes, before you ask, there are several explanations I could have offered over the last 2 years for why I never mentioned it, but the short version is I wanted to see whether your work could survive silence. Marcus stared at him. I stared too, because there is only so much plot twist a woman can absorb in one wedding day before her nervous system starts filing complaints. You ran a gallery, I said, not because it was a question, but because my brain needed smaller words before it could accept larger ones. Harold nodded once. Brenton Gallery. 22 years. Chelsea. We represented 43 artists in that time. 7 ended up in permanent museum collections. Bernard was one of mine before he became everyone's. Then he said the thing that made the whole evening change temperature. Marcus is the first painter I've seen in 15 years who makes me feel professionally irresponsible for staying retired. Marcus actually laughed, but it came out more like disbelief dressed to sound. Harold. No, Harold said, holding up one hand. Let me finish before you become noble and annoying. 6 months ago, I sent photographs of your work to a collector. Quietly. Without drama. Because if there's one thing I learned running a gallery, it's that real talent should be tested by the right eyes before it's exposed to the wrong mouths. He glanced toward me at that, and we both knew he was not only talking about the art world. The collector responded immediately. I felt my heartbeat change. Not race exactly. Focus. The way it does right before important information enters the room, and every other sound starts feeling optional. Who? Marcus asked. Harold's mouth twitched at one corner. Victor Ashland. Now, if you are not in the art world, let me help you understand what that name does to oxygen in a room. Victor Ashland is not a collector in the casual rich man buys painting over sofa sense. Victor Ashland is the kind of collector whose acquisitions change careers. The kind whose private dinners have more curators than forks, and whose storage facilities probably have better insurance than most small nations. Marcus sat down so suddenly, he nearly missed the chair. You're joking. I never joke about names and numbers, Harold said. Only politics and footwear. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a cream envelope with Marcus's full name handwritten on the front in ink. Inside was a printed agreement summary and a business card embossed so deeply the light caught it like a threat. Victor had purchased one of Marcus's paintings already. Quietly. For $85,000. I looked at Marcus.
He looked at me.
There are moments in a marriage where you see your spouse before they become public in a new way. This was one of them. He was still the man from our studio in paint-stained jeans who talked to canvases like they owed him emotional clarity. But now there was another line in the drawing. Recognition. Not future possibility. Present fact. Why didn't you tell us? I asked Harold, though the answer was already gathering shape. Because, he said, you were getting married, and money has a vulgar habit of trying to become the main character. I didn't want our wedding day confused by opportunists or by panic. I wanted your vows to stay yours. That sentence landed in me so hard I had to look away for a second, because hidden inside it was the most painful contrast of the whole day. The man who owed me nothing had protected the sanctity of my wedding more than my own family had. He had held back life-changing news out of respect. My relatives had staged a scheduling ambush out of jealousy. You cannot really come back from seeing that clearly. There's more, Harold said, because apparently the universe had decided subtlety was for weekday people. He took another document from the box, this one in a slim portfolio folder. Marcus opened it with the same careful hands he uses on fresh canvas. Inside was a formal letter from Caldwell Gallery on West 25th Street in Manhattan, one of the few galleries that can still change the direction of a painter's life without pretending otherwise. They wanted a solo exhibition. Not a maybe. Not a let's stay in touch. A real show. Preliminary title: The Seventh Chair. Proposed opening in the fall. 12 large-format oils centered on absence, ritual, family staging, and intimate abandonment. I looked up at Marcus sharply, because that title was not one I had heard him say aloud, though I recognized the shape of it instantly. Over the past month, he had been painting scenes that were all haunted by one missing figure. A dinner table with one untouched place setting. A church pew with a folded program at one end. A hallway with a coat hook left empty. I thought he was working through the wedding anxiety in private, the way artists do when their nervous systems are more articulate in oils than speech. I had not realized someone like Harold had already seen what the series was becoming and opened the correct doors before the paint was even fully dry. I wasn't going to say yes until after today, Marcus said, still staring at the letter like it might evaporate if he blinked too hard. I know, Harold replied. That's another reason I kept my mouth shut. I wanted to see what kind of people around you would show up before your life got expensive. That line sat between us a moment, and you could almost hear the click as every empty chair in the garden became newly legible. Harold wasn't just talking about support. He was talking about filtration. About what happens when visibility enters a family already sick with comparison. He had known. Or at least suspected. And now, looking across the lawn at the folded-up tables, the pizza boxes, Rachel barefoot on the grass laughing with Dave, the arch Marcus built with his own hands, I realized Harold had done something even more generous than offering professional access. He had let the truth of my family finish introducing itself before the money arrived. If this had happened 6 weeks earlier, my mother would have called it divine timing. Colette would have become suddenly emotional and supportive. My father would have rediscovered my number with both hands. Brett would have performed respect. They all would have shown up to my wedding smelling opportunity from the parking lot. Instead, they chose elsewhere first. They made their hierarchy visible. They picked the event with more gloss, more leverage, more social return. And now, standing in a garden they had left half empty, I understood the profound mercy of the order in which this had happened. Their absence was uncontaminated. It could not later be blamed on confusion. It was chosen cleanly before success, made attendance convenient. Harold, I said quietly, do you know what you did today? He looked faintly uncomfortable, which in a man like him usually meant he had been sincere enough to want no ceremony around it. I walked a bride down the aisle, he said. And I did my duty to painting. You did more than that, Marcus said, his voice rougher now. Harold shrugged once, but he didn't deny it. All right, he said. Then let me do one more thing. Don't tell anyone yet. Marcus frowned. About Victor? About Caldwell?
About any of it, Harold said.
Not tonight. Not this week. Let the people who skipped the wedding enjoy their assumptions long enough to become structurally stupid. Never interrupt arrogance while it's still building evidence. I nearly applauded. That line should be embroidered on throw pillows and distributed to every adult daughter in America with a manipulative family. Never interrupt arrogance while it's still building evidence. Marcus nodded slowly. I could see the logic landing in him. In me too. Because suddenly the shape of the coming weeks changed. This was no longer simply a story about who had shown up. It was becoming a story about who had revealed themselves before the lights changed. My family still thought Marcus was a talented but unstable painter renting cheap space in New Haven. They still thought my wedding had been small enough to dismiss. They still thought they had won some invisible contest by choosing the country club over the marsh garden. Let them. Let every assumption grow fat and comfortable. Let them sit in it. Let them speak from it. There is no revenge sharper than giving people enough silence to expose the architecture of their own contempt. We moved back toward the end eventually because weddings, even fractured ones, still require practical endings. Marcus helped Harold to his car. Rachel insisted on packaging leftover cake for everyone like emotional closure could be distributed in buttercream. Marlene kissed my cheek and told me not to let anyone rewrite what happened that day just because they regretted missing the photographs later. Then the garden went quiet. Really quiet. Just me and Marcus for a few minutes under the string lights while the marsh breathed in the dark and the arch stood behind us like some handmade witness. "How are you?" he asked. It was the right question. Not "are you okay?" Not "wasn't that incredible?"
How are you?
I looked at him, at the man my family had called a painter in a garden like it was an insult, and I said the truest thing I had. Married. Hurt. Curious. A little dangerous, maybe. He smiled at that, the slow smile that starts in one corner and means he has fallen a little more in love with me for saying the exact wrong thing correctly. "Good," he said. "I was hoping marriage would improve your villain potential." We laughed, and because the day had been what it was, I ended up crying immediately afterward, which felt on brand. Later that night, back at the studio, after the dress was hung and the bobby pins were removed and the lavender from the chairs had been brought home in small mason jars, I sat on the edge of the futon with my phone in my hand and looked at the black screen. Still nothing from my family. Not one message. Not one lie. Not even a badly timed emoji from some cousin trying to feel less involved than she was. Their silence, after all of that, was almost majestic. Marcus was in the bathroom washing paint and cake frosting off his cuffs, humming under his breath. From the kitchen table, the wrapped portfolio from Harold seemed to glow in the low lamp light like a secret with excellent posture. I thought about opening Instagram. I thought about checking whether Colette had posted more photos. I thought about seeing my father smile in someone else's celebration while my own dress still held the shape of his absence. Then I thought about Harold's line, "Never interrupt arrogance while it's still building evidence." So I put the phone face down and left it there. I had no idea yet that within a matter of weeks, one photograph, one gallery announcement, and one honeymoon the wrong people would finally see would send the same silent family into a frenzy so loud my phone would become almost unusable. But that night, in the soft studio light, surrounded by flowers from my own wedding and the first real proof that Marcus's work was about to outrun every small opinion ever thrown at it, I understood something crucial. The people who missed my wedding thought they had skipped a garden ceremony. In reality, they had skipped the last easy chance they would ever have to pretend they had believed in us before the world did. The week after the wedding felt less like newlywed life and more like standing in the strange stillness after a storm when you realize the trees that stayed standing are not the ones you expected. Marcus and I went back to the studio in New Haven with leftover lavender in jars, pizza boxes in the recycling, and a framed silence from my family that somehow weighed more than all 35 empty chairs had. That first Monday morning I woke up before him, padded into the kitchen in one of his paint-stained t-shirts, and stood by the sink staring out at the small backyard behind the building while the kettle warmed. The world looked offensively normal. A neighbor dragging out trash. A squirrel with a criminal amount of confidence. The old maple near the fence holding still in the damp June heat. I wanted something in the sky to crack open in recognition of what had happened, but real life is rude that way. It lets your heart split quietly while someone nearby waters tomatoes. Marcus came up behind me, wrapped both arms around my waist, and rested his chin on my shoulder. "You're doing a thing," he said. "What thing?" "Trying to outstare grief before coffee." He kissed the side of my head and went to make eggs. That was our marriage 24 hours in. No grand speeches, no dramatic healing monologue, just a man who could read the weather in my spine and knew scrambled eggs were sometimes a more respectful response than advice. We ate at the little wooden table under the north window, and while he talked through a framing issue with one of his cityscape paintings, I kept glancing at my phone lying face down near the sugar bowl like it might spontaneously grow a conscience. It didn't. No missed calls. No apology texts. No, "we know we failed you." Nothing. That silence started teaching me faster than any confrontation could have. Because once the wedding was over, My family no longer had a tactical reason to avoid the truth. The shower had happened. The damage was done. If my parents, my sister, or anyone else had wanted to say we were wrong, they had clean runway. They chose not to use it. That matters. People love to excuse family cruelty as panic, pressure, confusion, bad timing. But what they do after the pressure passes tells you what was real all along. And what my family did after? Absolutely nothing. Which meant the wedding was not an accident. It was an expression. Rachel stayed with us for 3 days after the ceremony because she said she didn't trust me not to start a healing journey on no sleep and spite, which apparently was a real concern in her mind. She spent those days moving through our studio like a foul-mouthed guardian angel. She grocery shopped, reorganized the floral jars, bullied Marcus into eating lunch at sensible times, and periodically checked my face the way ER nurses check monitors. On the second afternoon, she found me sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the coffee table with my wedding shoes still in the box and my phone in my hand. "No," she said immediately. "No what?" "No stalking the family online. No reading captions. No pain tourism." I looked up at her. "Pain tourism?" She crossed her arms.
Yes.
Going back to the scene emotionally, because at least it feels like movement. That woman should charge insurance. Because she was right. I had opened Instagram not because I expected anything useful, but because some part of me still wanted visual proof that I hadn't imagined the whole hierarchy. She took the phone from my hand, put it in the desk drawer, and said, "If they wanted you in the room, they knew the address. If they wanted to apologize, they know the number. Stop doing their emotional errands for them." That line sat with me the rest of the day. Stop doing their emotional errands for them. Families like mine survive by turning your reaction into labor. You wonder what they meant. You review the scene. You decode tone. You prepare for future conversations they may never have. You spend your own energy trying to build understanding where they only ever built convenience. I was tired of being the unpaid translator of other people's selfishness. So, I made a small decision that felt larger than it looked. I muted the family group chat.
Not left.
Muted. There's a difference. Leaving announces. Muting observes. And if there's one thing years in that family taught me, it is that truth loves a quiet witness. The next day, Harold invited us upstairs for coffee. Not a casual hallway stop, not one of his usual half-grunt, half-wisdom interactions on the front steps. A real invitation. "Tuesday. 4 o'clock," he said, leaning in our studio doorway with his chipped Chelsea mug in hand. "And wear something that doesn't suggest you've given up on civilization." I liked him more every time he spoke. His apartment upstairs was nothing like I expected when I first rented from him 2 years earlier. I had assumed retired landlord. Maybe some tired furniture, a radio, stacks of utility bills. Instead, it looked like the private reading room of a man who had spent his life near expensive objects, but didn't need to advertise it. Walnut shelves lined one wall from floor to ceiling. Art books the size of paving stones sat beside smaller monographs I recognized only because Marcus had once shown me auction catalogs the way some men show off baby photos. The furniture was old, real old, not fake distressed magazine old. There's a kind of chair people own only when they've spent enough time around good design to stop talking about it. Harold's apartment was full of those. He had set out 3 mugs, a French press, shortbread that looked homemade but probably came from somewhere overpriced, and a large archival portfolio box on the dining table. Marcus looked at the box first, then at Harold, then at me. You could feel the room narrowing. Harold waited until we were seated before he began, which is another reason I trusted him. People who understand power understand pacing. "I owe you context," he said, looking at Marcus. "And I owe your wife honesty about timing." Then he slid the portfolio box toward us. Inside were exhibition catalogs, old gallery postcards, photographs, clipped reviews, letters on heavy cream stationery from names I knew even with my limited art world exposure. Brenton Gallery, Chelsea, private views, museum dinners, Harold and photographs with artists whose work now hung in places with security guards and whispered tourists. For a second, my brain refused to connect the man upstairs who brought us tomatoes with the man in the photographs standing beside people worth more dead than my family's best furniture alive. I ran Brenton Gallery for 22 years, Harold said simply. Then I retired before I turned into one of those men who starts believing he invented other people's gifts. Marcus let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost alarm. You never said. Harold shrugged. You never asked anything useful. Then he turned to me. And because people reveal themselves differently when they think you have nothing to give them. That line made the whole week click into a different shape. Harold had not hidden himself out of shyness. He had hidden himself because concealment produces clarity. My family had looked at him and seen landlord, old man, background furniture. And because they saw him that way, they had moved carelessly in front of him. It never occurred to them that the quiet man refilling coffee at the studio had once made careers for a living. Harold opened another folder and laid out what he'd already hinted at in the garden. 6 months before the wedding, he had sent photographs of Marcus's work to Victor Ashland. Victor bought one piece almost immediately, $85,000. Then came the offer for a commission series. 12 original paintings over 18 months. Total contract value $450,000. Then the Caldwell Gallery invitation. Solo show. Fall opening. The 7th chair. Every time Harold said another detail, Marcus got quieter. Not because he wasn't thrilled. Because real artists are often the last people in the room to believe the room has widened for them. I watched his face as Harold spoke and saw awe, yes, but also grief. Because money and recognition don't arrive in clean emotional packaging when you have just been humiliated by the people who were supposed to love you first. Success entering the room right after betrayal doesn't cancel the betrayal. It simply lights it from a crueler angle. Why now? Marcus asked finally. Why tell us now? Harold looked at him, then at me, and did not soften what came next. Because now I know who your people are. The silence after that sentence was heavy enough to lean on. He wasn't talking only about family by blood. He was talking about selection.
Witness.
Character under pressure. He had watched my father not show up. He had watched 35 chairs stay empty. He had watched me walk down that aisle on his arm rather than collapse in the grass screaming for fairness. He had also watched Rachel, Dave, Lena, and a handful of others choose us without hesitation and without needing to know anything about Victor Ashland or Caldwell or future value. Had I told you 6 weeks ago, Harold said, your wedding would have become a feeding event. That phrase was so brutal and so precise I almost laughed. Feeding event.
Yes, exactly.
My mother would have wanted a dinner. Colette would have rediscovered sisterhood. Brett would have taken Marcus seriously. My father would have started telling golf buddies he'd always admired artistic discipline. They would not have shown up because they believed in us. They would have shown up because opportunity had changed clothes and become socially acceptable. I wanted your marriage to begin before the scavengers smelled blood, Harold added. And there it was, the real gift. Not the money, not the gallery, the sequence. He had protected the timeline. He had allowed my family's absence to become fully true before success could contaminate their motives. He had given me something almost no adult daughter gets when her family finally exposes itself. Clean data. By the time we left Harold's apartment, the summer light outside had gone honey-thick and low. Marcus carried the portfolio box downstairs like it contained weather. We spread everything across the studio table and just stared at it for a while. Contracts, letters,
Notes.
gallery language, shipping clauses, deadlines, payment schedules. It all looked more real under our own lamp. Do you know what this means? I asked. Marcus smiled, but it was uneven. That I need better shoes? That too. But also that your paintings are now worth more than Brett's opinions. That got a real laugh out of him. Thank God. We needed one. Then something strange happened over the next week. Nothing from my family on the emotional front, but tiny little pings of attention started appearing around the edges, as if some current had shifted in the water they were too proud to name. Natalie liked one of my old illustration posts after months of silence. Aunt Patricia texted, "How are you, sweetheart?" Which, translated from her dialect, meant she had heard something and wanted to be first to frame it. My mother left a voicemail pretending she just wanted to check in and adding, too casually, "How is Marcus's work going these days?" There it was. The first faint sniffing at the door.
They didn't know yet.
Not fully. But families like mine are weirdly sensitive to changes in status pressure. Like dogs before storms and rich people before audits. Around the same time, Brett's real estate company started wobbling in ways I only noticed because Harold noticed first. One evening, he came downstairs while Marcus was priming canvases and asked, "Has your brother-in-law always lived slightly beyond his eyebrows?" "What does that mean?" I asked. Harold handed me the business section of the paper folded open to a local real estate column. 2 stalled developments. Financing friction. Lender concern. Whitfield Properties was named in both. Nothing catastrophic yet. Just the kind of public strain that makes image-conscious families start checking mirrors more often. "Interesting," Harold murmured, not looking up from Marcus's latest piece. "Your sister appears to have married confidence on credit." That line deserved a standing ovation. We still told no one. Not my family. Not even my grandparents. Marcus signed the papers with Caldwell. Victor's office sent over the first installment. I watched numbers land in our account that looked accidental, like they had wandered in from a richer marriage. We paid off old studio debts. Bought proper archival storage. Replaced the window unit that had sounded like a dying tractor every July. For the first time in years, Marcus bought professional-grade pigments without doing that little pause at checkout where artists try to calculate whether talent can survive cheaper ultramarine. We didn't celebrate loudly. That's another thing families like mine misread about people who have had to build, honestly. We don't always perform joy when it arrives. Sometimes we sit beside it quietly because we know how quickly other people try to rename it. Then came the invitation from Victor Ashland himself. A honeymoon, late but stunning, aboard his yacht in Monaco as a personal welcome into the commission relationship. When Marcus read the email aloud, I thought for a moment he was joking in that very dry way he jokes when emotionally overwhelmed. He wasn't. 10 days. Mediterranean. All arranged. I sat down because apparently my life had decided to stop using normal stairs and start taking elevators at speed. "We can't tell them," I said immediately. Not because I was ashamed. Because timing had finally started working in my favor, and I had no intention of interrupting my family's ignorance while it was still producing such clean evidence. Marcus looked at me and understood at once. "No," he said. "We let them keep thinking they were right. And that is what we did. We packed quietly. We flew quietly. We landed in a world of white linen, dark blue water, silver trays, and the kind of wealth that no longer needs to prove itself with granite countertops back in Connecticut. And on the 3rd evening of that honeymoon, with the Monaco coastline glowing behind us and Marcus's hand warm at my waist, I posted one photograph. Just one. No essay. No announcement. No revenge caption. Just truth, arranged better than my family ever managed. By sunrise back in Connecticut, the same people who could not be bothered to text me on my wedding day were blowing up my phone so hard it nearly crashed. And the first message I opened told me everything. It wasn't "we miss you." It wasn't "you looked beautiful." It was my mother, at 3:12 a.m., asking one breathless question. "Addie, whose yacht is that?" I woke up in Monaco to a phone that looked like it had developed a panic disorder overnight. Not vibrating politely. Not blinking here and there with the occasional delayed congratulations from some distant cousin who remembered I existed only after seeing water expensive enough to reflect guilt correctly.
No.
My phone had fully surrendered to chaos. Screen glowing with stacked notifications, missed calls, text previews jammed on top of each other like people shoving at a locked door after pretending for weeks they didn't care who was inside. The room itself was absurdly calm, which made the contrast even more satisfying. Morning light pouring through the yacht suite's glass doors in long pale strips. White curtains moving slightly in the sea breeze. The faint rhythmic hush of water against the hull. Linen sheets so soft they felt like they had never known a discount code. Marcus was still asleep on his stomach, one arm slung across my waist, hair wrecked in a way I found deeply healing, and for a second I just lay there and listened to the Mediterranean, sounding completely unbothered by my family's emotional house fire. Then I picked up the phone. 417 messages. I counted because numbers matter and because my family only ever respects scale when it humiliates them personally. 417 texts, calls, voice notes, and social media pings from the exact same people who had somehow lost all motor function on my wedding day. The same people who could not type congratulations with even one working thumb when I married Marcus in a garden full of empty chairs had suddenly become champions of digital urgency because they saw one photograph of me standing on a yacht in Monaco, wearing a white silk dress and looking, I imagine, very much like someone who had not spent her honeymoon sobbing over a baby shower. The first message on the pile was my mother's. Addie, whose yacht is that? Not hello. Not are you okay? Not sweetheart. You looked beautiful. Straight to ownership. Straight to valuation. Straight to the question underneath every question my family had ever asked me once money might be nearby. Who owns this? Which really meant, what are we looking at and how should we reposition ourselves fast enough to avoid looking stupid later? The second message was from my father. Call me. This matters. I laughed out loud at that one. Matters. As if my wedding hadn't. As if vows in front of 7 people and 35 empty chairs were somehow less structurally important than his sudden desire for information. Then came Colette. Of course, she'd texted more than once. Her first message was just 3 words. Wait, what is this? Her second came 7 minutes later. Is Marcus actually successful now? Actually. That adverb belongs in a museum of family violence. It contains generations. Actually successful now. Not talented.
Not building.
Not working. Not deserving. Just successful now, in the only language she had ever been trained to recognize. The kind with visible upholstery. Brett had also texted, which may have been my favorite part of the whole thing. Congrats to you both. We should all have dinner when you're back. I may have some collectors who'd love to connect with Marcus. That man truly believed the first move after publicly skipping my wedding should be networking through the husband he'd privately looked down on. I admired the confidence the way one admires raccoons for learning how to open coolers. Not because it's admirable, because it's weirdly committed to self-interest. Marcus woke up when I snorted at my phone hard enough to shake the mattress. He rolled over slowly, squinting into the sunlight, and pushed himself up on one elbow. Either the yacht is sinking, he said, voice still rough with sleep, or your family found Instagram. I held up the screen.
Worse.
They found status. He took the phone, skimmed the previews, and let out one soft, incredulous laugh after another as he read. Your mother opened with, whose yacht is that? My father opened with, this matters. Your sister asked if I'm actually successful now. He looked up at me over the phone, and that expression on his face, somewhere between amusement and old hurt, made me want to kiss him and fight my entire bloodline at the same time. I should send her an itemized list, he said. Painting sold, emotional labor performed, dignity maintained under hostile conditions. Please add line items for surviving Thanksgiving. That's premium pricing. He handed the phone back. What do you want to do? That was the real question, wasn't it? Not what would feel satisfying for 6 minutes, not what would prove a point to the internet, not what line would look best on a thumbnail. What do you want to do? I sat with that while the boat moved almost imperceptibly beneath us, and someone somewhere on deck started placing breakfast trays with the kind of soft clatter only rich people can afford. What I wanted, if I'm honest, was not revenge. Not the screaming kind. Not even the neat cinematic kind where everybody realizes they misjudged you and weeps into folded napkins. I wanted precision. I wanted sequence. I wanted the people who had treated me as optional to be forced to encounter me as a fact. Not a wounded daughter. Not an overlooked sister.
A fact.
There is a difference, and once you understand it, you stop wasting your best sentences on emotional pickpockets. I want them to sit in it, I said finally. Marcus nodded, immediate and total.
Good.
Because they're already doing that. You can almost hear it in the punctuation. He wasn't wrong. My mother's messages had evolved from, "Whose yacht is that?" to, "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart. We need to celebrate when you get home," in under 20 minutes, which is exactly how women like her operate when the social value of a person suddenly spikes. She wasn't reacting to intimacy. She was updating branding. My father had moved from "call me" to "I had no idea things were going this well for Marcus," as if his ignorance were a mutual misunderstanding instead of a choice he had repeated over years. Aunt Patricia had sent 12 messages, each one more oily than the last, ending with "always knew that boy had something special," which would have been more convincing if she hadn't called him that paint-smelling renter at Easter. Even cousins I hadn't heard from in years were crawling out of the woodwork with little fake bursts of affection. "Obsessed with this for you," one of them wrote, which I'm fairly sure is how emotional parasites say, "Please don't remember how absent I was when there was nothing to gain." By the time we made it to breakfast on the upper deck, the family panic had moved from curiosity into active repositioning. The staff served us fruits so artfully sliced it looked like it had gone to finishing school. Silver domes, espresso, white linen, a coastline so beautiful it seemed rude. And there I was at a table overlooking the Mediterranean, scrolling through the emotional stock market of a family that had suddenly realized they might have shorted the wrong sister. Victor Ashland himself joined us halfway through coffee, all navy linen and old money quiet, and if you've never met someone with that level of cultural gravity, let me explain the effect. He did not fill the space with ego. He reduced the ego of everyone else in it by existing. "You look amused," he said, taking his seat. "My family discovered the internet this morning," I told him. "Ah," he said. "So they've seen the photograph." No surprise. No sentiment. Just the calm acknowledgement of a man who had spent decades watching people reveal themselves the minute status entered a room. Marcus, who by then had read enough of the texts to be hovering between laughter and disgust, said, "They skipped the wedding. Now apparently they're emotionally available because of a yacht." Victor buttered a piece of toast with the kind of focused serenity that should probably be illegal. "Families are often most attentive to art once someone else has priced it," he said. "That line should be engraved on institutional marble somewhere."
Because, yes, exactly.
My family didn't care that Marcus had talent. They cared that talent had acquired external valuation and therefore could now be socially borrowed. That had always been the game in my house. Not what something is, what something signals. Money didn't impress them because it solved anything. It impressed them because it rearranged pecking order. And now that the pecking order had shifted without their permission, they were spiraling. Later that afternoon, while Marcus spent 2 hours with Victor in the lower salon discussing the commission sequence and the Caldwell opening, I sat on the private balcony outside our suite with a glass of sparkling water and did the thing that finally ended the guessing game. I opened the family group chat. Not the private side messages. The main family thread where birthdays got acknowledged and grief got flattened into emoji, and every holiday plan became a referendum on who mattered most. It had gone silent after the wedding.
Dead silent.
No one posted congratulations. No one posted a photo of me in the dress. They all knew where they had been instead. But now the thread was alive in that ugly, unnatural way a room comes alive when smoke appears under the door. Cousins throwing in vague exclamation marks. Aunt Patricia posting the yacht photo as if she had discovered evidence at a crime scene. My mother trying to contain tone by writing, "Well, this is certainly exciting," which is how emotionally repressive women say, "I am choking on fresh class panic." Colette had posted nothing, which told me more than if she had filled the thread with pink heart nonsense. Silence is often envy trying not to show teeth. I typed one message, then deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Because the first 2 versions were wounded. Understandably wounded. But wounds are expensive when sent to people who use them as leverage. So I waited until I could feel my anger settle into something cleaner. Then I wrote, "Marcus signed a major commission 6 weeks ago. We didn't announce it because we wanted our wedding to stay about the wedding. I hope Colette's shower was everything she needed it to be." That was it. No screaming. No essay. No accusation. Just a timeline and a knife left on the table politely. I hit send and watched the typing bubbles appear and vanish across the thread like people reaching for words that would let them survive their own reflection. My mother answered first because of course she did. Addie, sweetheart, that's unfair. Unfair. There it was. Not incorrect. Not I'm sorry. Just unfair. Which is what people say when the truth arrives dressed better than they expected. I didn't answer. My father tried next. We did what we thought was best at the time. Another classic. Best for whom? Dad? Best for the daughter getting married? Best for the vows? Best for the promise you made? No, of course not. Best for the path of least discomfort through your own cowardice. Brett finally weighed in with, no one meant to diminish your day. I stared at that one and almost admired the audacity. He used the phrase diminish your day like they had accidentally put the wrong flowers on the tables instead of choosing finger sandwiches and pink balloons over my wedding. Colette was the one who detonated the room. Her first message in the thread all day. Can we not do this publicly?
Publicly.
That was what she objected to. Not the betrayal. The visibility. I answered her privately because I wanted the next part to land exactly where it belonged. You made your choice publicly, I wrote. You just expected my side of the story to stay small. She didn't reply for 9 minutes, which is a lifetime for a woman like my sister. Then came the message I knew was coming. I was pregnant, Addie. You have no idea how overwhelmed I was. Pregnancy. The universal family hall pass when no better moral cover is available. I leaned back in the deck chair and looked out at the water for a long second before typing. You were overwhelmed enough to schedule the shower on my date, call every relative individually, and tell Dad I'd understand, because I was used to disappointment. 3 dots.
Gone.
3 dots again.
Gone.
That is the thing about bringing receipts to a person who has always relied on emotional fog. They become briefly fascinated by punctuation because facts have made language feel unsafe. Finally, she wrote, I never thought you'd make this into something this big. I actually said wow out loud to no one. Not because the sentence surprised me.
Because it was so perfectly Colette.
The family could skip my wedding. My father could leave me to walk down the aisle without him. They could vanish into her event and leave me with 7 guests and silence. But me ending up somewhere spectacular, loved, and publicly associated with rising success? That was making it big. That was the offense. Not the wound. The scale of the aftermath. I didn't make it big, I wrote back. You just made sure it was unforgettable. Then I put the phone down and left it there. When Marcus came back to the suite just before sunset, he found me standing barefoot by the balcony rail watching the harbor turn gold. He didn't ask immediately. He just came up behind me, rested his hands on my hips, and stayed quiet long enough for me to hand him the story in the right order. That's another reason I married him. He understands order. Well, he said eventually. They're panicking aesthetically, I told him. And Colette still thinks visibility is the crime. He kissed the back of my neck.
Good.
Let her. We dressed for dinner on shore that evening, and as I zipped a simple black dress in the mirror, my phone lit again with another message from my father. Not in the group chat this time.
Directly.
I saw the photo of Marcus with Victor. Is there any chance we can start over? I read it twice because in some ways it was the most honest thing he had ever sent me. Not because it was good. Because it revealed the timeline. He didn't want to repair the wedding. He wanted to start over once he understood the value proposition had changed. That is the tragedy of fathers like mine. They do love you, I think, in whatever damaged utilitarian way they can manage. But they also rank outcomes before they rank people, and by the time they realize what that has cost, their daughters have usually learned to build without them. I never answered that message either. Because some starts do not deserve over. Some people do not get to skip the vows and still ask for the reception once the lighting improves. And if that sounds harsh, then maybe you haven't had to learn the difference between reconciliation and re-entry for opportunists. By the time the stars came out over Monaco, and we were walking back toward the yacht through a line of polished lights and expensive boats with names like Inheritance and Denial probably hidden somewhere under the lacquer, my phone had gone quiet again. Not because they were calm, because they had run out of angles for the day. They would return, I knew that. With softer language, with concern, with strategic shame. Maybe even with apologies shaped just enough like requests to pass in family court. But they had already lost the part that mattered most. The clean version of history. They no longer got to tell themselves they always believed in us, always supported Marcus, always meant well. They skipped my wedding. They chose her party. Then they saw where I ended up. That was the sequence, and sequence is where truth lives. The next message that would come, the one that would finally force me to decide whether distance was enough or if clarity needed one last public shape, wouldn't be from my mother, my father, or even Colette. It would come from someone who understood leverage in the only language my family ever truly respected. And when that message arrived, it would prove that what happened in that garden in Mystic hadn't just embarrassed them morally. It had repositioned them financially in ways they were only beginning to feel.